Hey everybody, welcome back. So any of you guys that have followed us for any length of time know that we do a lot of handling with large constrictors and reading behavior and things like that. We actually have started a series now on reading snake behavior, and I decided to take a break from that series because I'd gotten a question in and I thought it was a lot more efficient and a lot better to just answer that question with a video, because it's something that we get asked pretty frequently. And I think it may help to put things into perspective for folks that are wanting to get into big constrictors or kind of wanting to learn to understand a little bit more about how we build those relationships with them and how we get them to the point where we can take them out and work with them and not be afraid of them and them not be afraid of us. So we will go ahead and read that question off and answer it here in just a second on Intrepid Exotics. Whether you're a lifelong keeper or just getting started, help us encourage responsible keeping, conservation, and public education in the interest of keeping our reptiles safe and healthy as we protect them for future generations. You're invited to spend time with us as we experience these awesome animals together on Intrepid Exotics. Now don't forget, guys, before we get started, the link to USARK.org is always down in the description of all my videos. If you're a reptile or an exotics keeper of any stripe, get down, check them out. Very, very useful organization, and they need our support in order to support us to help maintaining our rights to keep our animals. Very important stuff. Get down in the description and check it out. Now, just to get to the question really quick, and I'm not going to mention this person's name because I haven't asked them if it's okay if I put it out there, and I don't want to just arbitrarily throw anybody's name from a private conversation out into a video in case they wanted to maintain some anonymity. But essentially what she asked is, I find lots of varied information on raising these snakes. How does one raise a big snake, a Burm, to be as wonderful as yours are? How do you raise yours? Because not knowing the key to this has been the thing that's kept me from getting a Burm of my own. I could retrofit nearly my entire garage for a final enclosure. And this is a really common question. And it's one of those things that there's just so much to go into about it. And typing out a text response just wouldn't work. So here we are talking about it. The one thing to preface with is that there's always conversations between reptile keepers about what's the best starter snake. And it ultimately, you're going to hear everything from ball pythons to corn snakes to boas to anything that you can think of. You're going to hear some species that are more advanced, like, reticulated pythons, Burms, anacondas, things of that nature. Some of the arboreal species that are known to take a little bit more care in handling and things like that, is not being beginner snakes necessarily. But you'll hear everything. And ultimately, there's two things that decide what the best beginner snake is for you. And that is, your space that you've got available for the animal and what your commitment is. I would not tell somebody that under no circumstances should you ever get a reticulated python as a first snake. Because when you get that animal, it's going to be 18, 24 inches, and you've got time to work with it. And if you've got the space and you've got the commitment, then you can be successful raising that animal and you can grow with it and you can have an outstanding experience. I know people that have done it before. I have one of our viewers here. We actually made a video a couple years ago. The first snake that she ever touched was a reticulated python, and she bought it, brought it home that day, and has learned and has grown with it and has just learned to love it and has been really successful with that animal. So the level of commitment is ultimately the deciding factor on what kind of animal you're going to get. And you need to confirm this with yourself too. I always recommend folks that before you go out and you get an animal that's going to get 12, 14, 16 feet long, do what you can to get in a position with somebody who keeps those animals that you can go and get your hands on them and see what it's like. See what it's like to try and manage a 50, 60, 70, 80, 100-pound animal. And just start to see, okay, well, this is what I need to, I know this is what I need to prepare myself for over the course of the next few years. Keeping snakes is not difficult. It's not difficult to learn. but it does require that honest commitment and making sure that you're getting good information. So in this situation, I actually didn't ask. I haven't had any other conversations with her except, you know what, this is a good idea for a video, so I'm going to make a video on it. So I didn't go into any detail about what's your experience with other snakes and things like that, for the reasons that I just said. You know, we're talking strictly about this one species, Burmese pythons. Now, again, for those of you guys that keep up with me, you've seen plenty of videos of me out interacting with my bigger snakes and so forth, and how easy it is to interact with them. Now, for somebody who's considering a Burmese python, and you already know that you've got the space for it, and you know you want to, of course, it's always better to start off with a young snake. Now, when I say that, if you don't already have experience working with snakes, hatchling snakes can be a little bit trickier sometimes. You can run into eating problems and stuff like that. If you get a snake that's about 6 months to a year old, they're still young. They're past that initial hatchling phase. So that might be an easier place to start if you don't have experience working with them. I'm going to use the example of Athena down here. She's my normal Burmese python. And I've had her since she was a hatchling. And actually, I found out after the fact, after I'd gotten her, that she hadn't even had her first meal or her first shed yet. Which is a no-no. No breeder should ever let loose of an animal like that. They need to make sure it's established first. So when you do go out and you start looking for a place to get your animal, make sure these are questions that you're asking. You know, you talk to them, say, okay, yeah, here, I'm going to pay for the animal. And they say, okay, well, I'm going to ship it out here. You need to be asking, okay, so how many times is it eaten? Has it shed yet? What date was it hatched out? Stuff like that. And, you know, if they're cutting this animal loose, you know, a week or two after it's come out of the egg and there hasn't been enough time for the animal to really be established and show to be viable and healthy and all that stuff and eating and shedding, then you definitely you're going to be taking on some kind of a problem. When I got this girl, like I said, because of, you know, how soon I had gotten her, she wouldn't open her mouth for any reason. I had to force feed her for every bit of 2 or 3 months. And that's just an unpleasant thing to have to do to begin with. It doesn't hurt them, but if you know what you're doing, it doesn't hurt them. If you make a mistake, you can kill them. But that being said, I mean, it's still not something that you really want to go through. You want to make sure that the animal's established. Now, I've got the 13-foot male Burmese downstairs, who is just a straight puppy dog. Does the same thing that Athena does when I go up to the enclosure and I open it up. Head comes out. He'll come out sometimes, crawl right up on my shoulders. Sometimes he just goes out to start cruising around. It's the easiest animal to manage. Now, they've still got their instincts. They've still got their food response, things like that. So you've still got to invest that time into learning their behavior and so forth. But if you're going to get started with a Burmese python, get a hatchling, get a younger animal, and start working with them from that point. Now, with her, I think one thing that makes her a really good example of how that is so important to building the relationship with your animal is that, you know, the first couple, 2-3 months of her life, she had negative experiences with me. You know, I had to pick her up. I had to secure her body. I had to hold her by the neck like this and force feed her. Just not a pleasant experience for her. And then once she started eating on her own, everything was fine. Never had any problems. She was never afraid of me. And the odd thing was about it, that was even in between feedings, when we was dealing with that with her, she still never acted like she was afraid of me. It's kind of weird, because my expectation was that she was going to be terrified of me because I was inflicting that kind of discomfort on her. But that was never the case. I think a lot of the reason why that wasn't the case is when you start working with an animal and you know it's going to get big, you know it's going to get heavy, it's just like any other animal that you're going to work with. You invest the time into learning to recognize their behaviors. And like I said, we're working on that series right now that's going to go into a little bit more detail. The tricky part of that is I've got to find the actual video reels that demonstrates the behavior that I'm talking about, so that it'll actually be meaningful to people. I could sit here and describe it all day long, but it doesn't mean anything until you're looking at the animal and you're seeing the clues. So that's kind of what we're working towards there with that. So it's definitely a matter of, if you invest the time into learning their behavior, learning how to recognize it, and learning what makes them comfortable, then the rest of the process is going to be easy. It's going to happen on its own. There's always lines that we've got to kind of balance on sometimes with some animals based on what their demeanor is. You know, some animals like to be handled more than others. Some animals have got hotter natural food responses than others. Some of them are a little bit more skittish than others. So we've just got to learn how to recognize those behaviors and respond to those accordingly. Do what the snake does. Don't get it stuck in our head that, okay, I need to feed this animal every 7 days exactly. I need to handle him 3 times a week for 30 minutes. And this is the schedule that we're on, so this is what I need to maintain in order to make sure that we've got a relationship. Well, there's going to be times when you go into that animal's enclosure and they look at you and you can tell they want you to go away. The best thing to do in those cases, unless you absolutely have to get them out, is to look at them and go away. Show them that respect. You know, there's going to be times when the animal doesn't want to come out and interact. It's comfortable. It's, you know, had just eaten or something like that. Maybe it's getting ready to go into shed, just doesn't want to be handled. So we don't work things on a time schedule. It's not a job. It's an interaction. So when you get your snake and you start working with them, like I said, there's going to be times, and if she would just get her tail out of this little crease in the chair. There. Okay. It can be so distracting sometimes having these guys. But when you start working with them like that, and you're really good at reading your behavior and knowing to recognize when they've got a food response and you need to kind of tap them over with the hook a little bit before you take them out. If you can recognize when they're uncomfortable, when they don't want to be messed with, and just leave them alone. And typically what I'll do in those cases is if I see them running the glass, and that's just what I call it. Like she was doing when I first sat down here, she seen me out here. She wanted to get out and interact just like she is now. So she's, up there by the glass, running her nose up along it and stuff like that. You'll see our animals do that when they're ready to interact with you. And if they're comfortable with you, they'll do it more. So it's a self-perpetuating cycle of trust and positivity that you build with them. With this girl, like I said, man, it's been from day one. I can go into her enclosure, open the door, and her nose is almost always right there on the glass waiting to interact. And when I come out, I'll start stroking her neck. I'm not worried about her biting me. She knows the interaction. She recognizes me. And I can see when she's got her nose up like that and just cruising, she wants to come out. So when I open up the door, I could just reach right in and stroke her under the chin and whatnot. Sometimes I'll do that and she'll just sit there as long as I scratch her chin, not move. And then as soon as I stop, she'll just kind of fall back into her enclosure. I do that a lot in the mornings before I'm getting ready to go to work. I'll see her nose there and I'll open up the door and just, scratch her. Those short interactions. And that's one of the things that you'll see, like with the Sri Lankan python up here. It was kind of brief interactions at first, just getting out, getting through the hard part, handling them just long enough for them to get comfortable. And, stop fighting, stop musking, stop striking. And you just start looking for those long, curious tongue flicks. You look for the slow, deliberate movements like this, just like she's doing. And when you first get started with them, that's all you need to do, really. You get them out, and you just let them get to this point for a little while of just, okay, I'm going to check stuff out. I'm moving slow. I'm not scared. The tongue's just going out, checking stuff out. And that's the way you put them back into the enclosure. That's the note that you leave on. You leave on a positive note. So when I get her, I have her out. She's just going to run around for a little while and do whatever she wants to. And then I put her back in her enclosure on a positive note. And just like I'm going to do right now. She's been out for a little while. I'm just going to let her go back into her house. And, you know, particularly with newer snakes, just be careful with their tail when you're putting them back into the enclosure. Some snakes, it doesn't bother them one bit. Other snakes, they may turn around and strike you if you tap their tail. The snake's tail is their gas pedal. If you hit that, you'll see that tail whip around more often than not, and they'll take off. People get into the habit of doing that. I've been in the habit of doing that before, and it's almost got me bit a couple times. And it's made the relationship with the Sri Lankan take a little bit longer, just because of the couple times that I brushed against his tail, and he immediately went from being calm and cool to immediately back on point and defensive again. And I think it spoiled the whole good interaction ahead of time. So when you put them back in there, just, you know, let them go at their own speed. Get them back inside the door and close them up. And you can see, I mean, she would have stayed out the rest of the night if I'd let her. She's still sitting there at the glass looking at me like, well, I wasn't quite ready to come home yet. But, so I mean, it really is that simple. Just going through, doing the right things with them. You know, if you're going to get an animal and you know in 2, 3, 4 years it's going to get large, you got all the time in the world, as long as you're committed to that time frame of working with that animal, knowing what the end result is. You got all the time in the world to work on a relationship, build that trust, learn the animal, let that animal learn you. And it's not that hard. It's really not. It's one of the things that I talk about sometimes when we talk about, you know, like egos, especially around something like giant reptiles. You know, you'll see some people out there that get these 16, 18-foot retics, things like that. These big, bulky dudes, and they're like, man, look at how tough I am. I got this big reticulated python, and you can't do it because you're just not a stud. You got to be a man to work with an animal like this. And that's just so not the case. That's just such BS. I've seen the most small-statured women and kids working with large snakes. I've seen people that were barely 100 pounds soaking wet managing a 20-foot snake before. Because I really don't care how big you are. There's a limit to how much you could muscle, and a 20-foot retic is a pretty strong animal. Just like with most things. It's what you know and how much you can finesse the situation is going to help you a lot more many times than sheer strength. Unless you're just trying to pick the animal up and move it and put it away. Don't get me wrong. You do need some strength working with an animal like that. Or you need help because they get heavy. But the whole point to that is that anybody can do it. It's just, I know it sounds oversimplified. And I know we're always talking about that thing where, you know, there's the double-edged sword of keeping retics, for instance. You know, they can be the easiest animal in the world to work with, or they can be a sheer terror and a nightmare to work with. Well, the thing is that if we're completely responsible for that snake, since it's a baby, then whichever way that snake goes is completely our responsibility. We can make that snake docile and happy and give it a good life, or we can scare it, disrespect it, and make it a very dangerous animal. It's all on us. So to answer your question, how do I do it? It's really that simple. It's just like that. Don't be afraid to go out and start working with these animals. This girl right here is, I want to say she's about 3 years old, maybe, from the time I've gotten her. And you can see how big she is. She's still very manageable. I do think that she would be bigger if she had started eating on her own right out of the egg. And we didn't have to go through the whole force feeding thing and stuff like that. That may have kind of impacted her growth a little bit. But she's doing good. We've had a lot of time together so far, and she's still manageable. So if you get a hatchling and you keep working with her, and you keep growing with her, you're going to have all the time in the world to be completely comfortable. And by the time that animal gets 12, 14, 16 feet long, you guys are going to have that relationship in spades. You're not going to have to worry about that animal. That animal's not going to worry about you. And over the course of a few years, learning as much as you can, and going out and interacting with other animals and stuff like that, it's going to be a piece of cake. Keeping snakes, working with them, it's not that hard. You don't got to be a rocket scientist to do it. Just got to have the respect and a commitment for them, and anybody can do it. So I hope that answered your question. If you have any more questions, don't hesitate. Jump on, talk with me and stuff like that. If you're looking at buying a snake or something like that, then go ahead and run it by me. I may know the breeder, I may not. I may be able to. I know a lot of people in the community, so I can always run stuff that I don't know by somebody else and see if they've got answers, recommendations, stuff like that. So by all means, hit me up. Like I said, the whole goal here is to just help as many people have the best relationships that they can with some amazing animals. And we've been doing that. We're going to continue doing that. So don't forget, guys, jump down, get subscribed to the channel before you go. I'm going to put in the end screen this time the Sri Lankan video series again, because that kind of illustrates some skills that you'll have, with a young snake that might be afraid or something like that, and kind of see what is really the worst case scenario with a smaller snake, and how quickly and easily you can overcome all of that stuff with them. Most cases, it's going to be much, much easier than that guy was. So you guys have an outstanding night. USARK.org. Subscribe to the channel. Get notified when new stuff comes out. We're going to be working on the Recognizing Behavior series. We're going to continue on with that. And we will see you guys next time on Intrepid Exotics.